Hello, everyone. So we are back today for another career and spirituality conversation. So for those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Julie Pone, and I support spiritual seekers having a career experience to grow professionally and spiritually. And today I have the pleasure to meet Tina Frey. Hi, Tina. How are you today?
Hi, I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So Tina, I'm excited for this conversation, and especially that we have had a chat with your husband, Johan, not that long ago. So that's exciting to see how your career trajectory and your experience with spirituality. So I'm excited about that. And before we start, as usual, we'll have a 1-2 minutes little grounding. So for everyone who is able to do that without taking any risks, so don't do that if you're in a car or something like that, but let's close our eyes and give ourselves a little stretch. If you wish, allow yourself to find a comfortable position, and with the eyes closed, let's first press our feet onto the ground, just to feel the support of the earth underneath ourselves, the ultimate support that we're having in this reality. Just giving her a little acknowledgement and gratitude. And then bringing our attention and focus back up to our chest, and right in the middle of our chest to our heart. And maybe we can feel our heart beating. Maybe we can even hear our heart beating. Paying attention to our heart. And visualizing, imagining as if our breath is flowing in and out directly through our heart. And from there, just taking some deeper and slower breath for about a minute, breathing a little bit slower and deeper than we usually do. And keep visualizing our breath flowing in and out from the heart. As we take this slow, deep breath. Now, beautiful. And when we are ready, let's open our eyes again and ta-da! Welcome back. Hello
That was
again.
beautiful.
Oh, thank you. So welcome, Tina. So for our audience, so Tina is the founder and creative director of TF Design. So TF for Tina Frey Design. And so TF Design is a homeware, furniture, lighting, and accessories company that Tina founded 16 years ago. So that's going to be interesting to talk about her career and how she moved from actually finance to design. And for those of you who are curious and can't wait and want to have a look at the designs, and you want to type it in while you're listening to us, you can check www.tf.design, or you can jump on Instagram at Tina Frey Designs. And I'll make sure that the name appears on the screen so you can just type it in and it's easy for you to find. But I know myself, if I heard about some design stuff, I would straight away want to have a look while I'm listening. So I hear you. Okay, so Tina, thank you so much for joining us today. And as usual, I'm gonna grill you with my first question, which is about spirituality and what is your relationship to spirituality and what does it mean to you? How has your spiritual journey been so far?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I really appreciate it. So spirituality, it's interesting to think way back to one's childhood, because spirituality is probably something that's a part of you, whether or not you pay attention to it or not. If you really sit back and think about it, you realize that it probably was present with you since you were very young. For me personally, I feel I knew about it since I was very young, but forgot about it for many years, because as we grow up, go to school, have our parents, society, education, whatever that is that's all around us, it inevitably sort of starts to cloud what our pure being and our pure essence and source and people are, your identity, your person is truly. And so a lot of times those clouds that sort of get in your way of knowing who you are gets lost. And sometimes people are able to rediscover it later in life, and sometimes they may or may not, or it might be there, but you don't even recognize it as spirituality. For me, I feel I remember certain things when I was really young, like say when I was the age of maybe 4 or 5. Before I was born in Hong Kong, and I remember living in Hong Kong at the time. And my family, we moved to Canada when I was about 6 or 7 years old. But when I was young and before I started going to school, I remember, this would have been around the age of 4 or 5, before a lot of the preconceived notions of right or wrong, what's possible, not possible, before those belief systems really get into your head. And I think as I've read about it in later life, it's where your mind is more elastic and you have basically better access to what spirituality is. I guess is what I define as the spirituality side, is there's like a bit of a knowing of something maybe bigger, different from yourself. It's your soul or who you are. You can almost see yourself from a removed aspect of who you are. And I have this recurring sort of remembrance of my childhood at around age 4, kind of thinking, I'm this being that's plopped into this existence, in this family, with this household, in this life. And I remember having this really kind of profound knowledge or feeling of this as a soul, I guess, maybe now that I think about what it is, but there was some feeling of a removal of myself from me physically, that there was this interesting sort of concept of it. And I forgot about this really growing up, and really never thought about it until I'd say about 6 years ago, and I started to get into meditation and had these thoughts of like, this is really interesting. It's almost like a remembrance of something that I probably already knew about myself since childhood. Yeah. And so growing up, I sort of forgot about it. However, I was raised Catholic. So I went to Catholic school, went to church, and spirituality, I think growing up, you define it as the typical things, what you learn going to church, God, Jesus, all of the typical belief systems of what spirituality is. But that real true meaning of what it is, I don't think you completely resonate or understand what it is or what it feels like, because it's in a way a bit textbook, in the sense that you can read all about spirituality, but until you actually start to feel what that is like, it becomes a different sort of understanding. And so for me, the spirituality side started to really develop more 6 years ago, when I started to, as I mentioned, get into meditation and starting to really discover what this voice, this feeling, this sense of source connection. And so to me now, I think spirituality encompasses a lot of this sort of unseen knowing energy. And it's not necessarily defined just by the vision of what growing up God, Jesus, because spirituality is not just one religion. It really is many different backgrounds, religions, belief systems, and the commonalities between all these different connections to spirit is defined differently, but they're all spirituality. And so we all have this in common, and it's like something that's much bigger than all of us.
Yeah.
So that's how I feel spirituality to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like your description of the feeling as a kid. I had something, well, probably not similar, but of a weird feeling. I remember sometimes I'm asking people, oh, do you remember that when you were a kid? And sometimes people look at me like, what? I remember having these weird thoughts that, weird question about what am I doing here? Or what is this?
Yes.
I mean, as in what is this world? Not being like a deeper question than like, what's this, how, like something, it's hard to explain as an adult, but it's the first time that I hear someone, like evoking something maybe a little bit similar. So it sounds like you had a deeper sense about what it meant, that you were like a soul and that had been kind of, isolated and like in this world. I couldn't really grasp what it was, but I remember really wondering, what the hell? What am I doing?
Yeah, and I don't think I even understood it as a soul, but I remembered feeling separate from it, and that the feeling of my parents, I realized they were my parents, but there was almost like, I don't want to say a choice, maybe there was a choice that your soul in your past life before you come to earth, if you believe in that, perhaps there was some knowing that, you were separate and that there was a choice to come into this earth, but there was this distinct feeling of awareness of, I'm in this family versus any other family, and that there was a knowing of something different about that.
Oh yeah, so yeah, it goes beyond. So yeah, about there is some sort of a plan. There has been something designed here. I chose to be with this particular set of parents. Okay,
Right.
oh, that's very,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
But I agree with you. It's probably at that age that we are the closest from remembering.
Right. And I know I've since read more about this, and that there are parents who communicate with their babies before they're born, or babies knowing when they're born. And so kind of reading and hearing more about that, it's kind of helps me piece together, oh, that's probably why I felt that way. It was a very unusual, distinct knowingness of something different that I
And
couldn't explain.
I don't know if nowadays, is it that the veil has got thinner, or like, we're moving into a different, I don't know, consciousness state or dimension, whatever way you want to call it? Or is it because of social media? We hear more about these stories, but I've seen a lot more of these testimonies of parents saying, oh, my daughter or my son has just told me like, oh, but mommy, you're not, like I had a different mom, who basically the children described the parents they had right before, like they're really very specific about.
Right. Like past life experiences or reincarnations of things like that.
Yeah.
And that is truly fascinating. That wasn't quite what I had, but reading about it, and there's too much evidence out there of people with their past memories that really leads you to believe, there's something probably much bigger than we're able to understand. Because when you focus really on our limited senses of sight, smell, sound, and so on, it's actually very limited. And it's not until you actually start to pay attention and open up to these other senses that you realize there's actually a lot more out there than what we're taught to believe we're capable of. And so I think even if you told me 6 years ago, before I got into this, that I would believe this sort of possibility, I would have thought you were nuts. I would have thought you're a hippie person and like, what are you talking about? But as things started to open up for me and experience started to become more firsthand and interesting, I no longer doubt the possibility of a greater spirit, a greater source, and greater energy beyond us. And it can be very reassuring as well to know that.
Yeah. Yeah, so imagine, so like you started your meditative journey, let's say 6 years ago. Imagine if as children, like, like when we're in that phase of like nearly remembering, then we would be starting our journey into meditation, like, how that may speed up our process of understanding our connection with everything and yeah, spirituality. But like it's probably getting, maybe we're getting there in education, I don't know.
Well, I feel it is in many respects, because you definitely do hear of more reading, and unless it's just something I'm paying attention to, but in terms of consciousness and the openness to it and meditation, it has become more common to talk about it. And so if parents are into it and they teach their children, inevitably they're bound to be more encouraged to not block that side of them growing up, right? Because children, I think, are so plastic in their abilities to learn that if you actually encourage them to be open to it, it can only be beneficial, because it's like a practice. It's a muscle that you can learn to utilize. So it's yeah, I do think it's becoming more into our consciousness or into popular culture, whatever that is. But awareness and mindfulness, I mean, I know we hear those terms, but it can only help to encourage folks to become aware of what is around them, what they feel within. And yeah, I think that's a good movement to be in.
Yes, exactly. So moving on, maybe on to, like your more your professional journey. Yeah. So can you tell us, give us an idea of your trajectory? Where did you start? And now we know that you're in a very creative career, but and I'm sure you're going to inspire a lot of people who have a creative incline, and inspire them with possibilities. So up to you, Tina. Give us give us your story.
Sure, happy to do that. So if I really think back to my growing up and my childhood, and this might not be dissimilar for a lot of people, maybe even more so of my generation, because I think back in the time when I grew up, people tended to have careers that were very long, and they worked for probably the same company until they retired. And that was maybe more common in my parents' age. And so by the time it got to be my generation, I probably had a bit of that belief system that, hey, you're supposed to find a job, make money, have a career, get married, have kids, have a car, house, the typical beliefs of what's considered success. And I think on top of all of that, there's the cultural side of things, where growing up with, Asian parents, there's an expectation perhaps of, acceptable careers that has to be respectable, science, doctor, lawyer, whatever that may be. And so at some point I remember—
That's not a legend. No, that's not a legend. You said, like,
I don't think
Asian parents.
it's probably not a legend. There was like probably even if your parents didn't say so, I think culturally it's your epigenetics, whatever it is, culturally you kind of maybe feel this pressure in a way to pick a career that's not too out of the ordinary. Right. And so my whole entire life, since I was little, I was always creative, though. So this was something that always brought me joy. I always had access. Luckily, I was very fortunate. My parents provided, access to things like drawing paper, pencil crayons. I always had access to materials for creating things, but they were always so much fun for me. It never occurred to me that that could be a career. It was something that was just a joy. But I think the other cultural side of, hey, you're supposed to have a career, there's the other side to pick something that's challenging. So I always thought learning was important, and I still do think learning is important, but there was also this fine line of, okay, is learning and struggle, like to do something that's not your natural path, where's the fine line to know where that border is? But growing up, I, thought, okay, maybe I should be learning science, math, chemistry, and felt perhaps that was the right path to what a proper career was. And so even though I did all the enjoyable things that I really liked with creative, it just never really felt to me like something I would pursue as my job.
But do you have, let's say, was it coming from you? Or like, let's say if you had wanted at the time to pursue something creative, would it have been possible, or would it have been badly received that you sort of felt that was not allowed?
I don't know if it was not allowed. I think it didn't seem like it was feasible. So it wasn't discouraged for me to do creative things. I definitely did it, but it was always thought of as a hobby.
Yeah.
I mean, I was always making things, but there was also then the school, the study that was separate. And so you were expected, I think, as society in many ways to pursue like go to school, make sure you get your good grades, and then anything you do is fun. Some people pick sports, and I played musical instruments and I did creative things, made things with my hands, but that was always kind of not thought of as the career path. I think partly also, perhaps it's society, education, belief systems. It never occurred to me that was a path to be an artist, or to pick that as a career. I also grew up in Canada. Great place to grow up, lovely country, friendly people. But I think that the industry, or really options for jobs, careers, I never really saw at the time, and maybe times have changed nowadays, but I never really saw where the career path was at that time. So it also, I guess, never occurred to me that was something to be pursued as a job. So by the time I got through school and, did the standard courses you had to do to graduate and then get into university, I had to decide what I was going to do. And then when I entered university, I thought I was going to be a dentist. And so I went into pre-dentistry. I mean, so studied all the sciences, chemistry, biology, you name it, physics, math, all the hard subjects that you need to get.
Did you think you were going to be, did you have a particular interest, or was it just, out of you sure, why not?
Well, it was partly, okay, practical reasons. If you're a dentist, you have your office hours. You don't necessarily get called to the ER, whatever that might be. I mean, it's not like you couldn't with the doctor either. I have no idea why. Maybe because I was meticulous. I don't know. Could imagine working with my hands and being really detail oriented.
Yeah.
So it felt like a respectable career. And actually, I should say, I have a feeling I picked dentistry because it was at a university that was 3 hours north of where I grew up. And so it meant I could go away for school. And so it was perhaps prompted by some silly aspect of that, of, hey, I can have some freedom of not living at home. So decisions that you make when you're young are really quite funny. So I went away for school, and it was very clear when I got to university what my strengths were. And I think I knew that pretty clearly, because all those science classes that I did, they were a complete struggle. And I knew it within my soul that it was like, oh, this is the most tedious, most uninteresting subject for me ever. And it's not to say there are natural people who are really good at it, and you just look at them in awe, like, how in the world do you just whiz through this sort of a thing, right? Yeah. But for me, I remember I had the art electives, and so I would have the studio art class or art history or whatever those courses were, and I just felt so alive. And there was this distinct remembrance of the knowledge of when I was in one faculty, like everything about my being completely fit into one and not in the other. And that was very obvious to me at the time. However, at that age, I think you're also partially dependent on your parents. And approval from your parents is important, and of course, financial support, etc. And so I felt really compelled to, I need to finish this degree, even though it just was soul sucking, painfully hard. And, my grades were like, I got through, I was fine, but it was really the other courses that I enjoyed that, helped with the grades, and not the actual courses that I needed or not the good grades. Needless to say, I graduated with my science degree and was like, what am I going to do with this degree? Because it was kind of a bit general, because I decided at some point, or it was probably decided for me, that my grades weren't really going to be good enough for me to get into dentistry. So the signs are there. At some point, I thought maybe I'll switch into food science. And I worked in a lab and 2 summers in a row, and it was also equally like mind-numbing work. So there were times when I kind of just knew this is probably not going to be my long-term life goal. Like, if this is going to be my job and I'm going to have to do this until I whatever retire, because that's also the mindset at the time, that you pick something and you stick with it until you retire. I knew that that wasn't going to be the thing for me as well, because that summer job was just it's good that I had the summer job in that field in food science, because it basically told me I knew I didn't want to be in a lab and just doing the same thing. It was very repetitive over and over again. There might be different types of jobs in food science that would have been more interesting, but that summer job for me was very eye-opening, that wasn't the one. So then I ended up switching and doing a business degree, and then majoring in finance, and then graduating and working in public accounting. Now, keep in mind, even though I did switch to switch programs and finish that, there was still some signs along the way that, I can get through this. I probably learned to study better and get better grades and got through. And when I graduated, I had lots of job offers. And for, in Canada, we do like the chartered accountant program. And I got lots of job offers and worked in public accounting, and then eventually moved to the US and became a certified public accounting, a CPA. And, those, I was able to do it and have a good career, and eventually worked in industry in different companies. And it was, I guess, something you're able to do, but you're not truly lit up by the passion of it. And so I think that whole first part of my career was, I'd say, about 13 years of my career doing the finance side of things, where I did the expected, having the job title, having a car, the car that you wanted, whatever. I mean, all those material things. And at some point,
ticking the boxes.
Checking the boxes, and you realize this is not all about just the money, the fulfillment of that. It's not fulfilling. It's not truly what makes your soul tick. However, I know that having that career has its advantages in the sense that, when you do have some financial independence, you're able to utilize that time to kind of focus on, hey, what sorts of things do I really enjoy? What do I like? I really enjoyed traveling. I really enjoyed people. I enjoyed experiences. And so it allowed you to, or afforded you the freedom to do some of those things. But at some point, you do know that those are not quite enough. And so as I was in my finance career, I started to work for progressively smaller and smaller companies, which ended up being a little bit more fulfilling, because at least you feel like you're having more of an impact. You're able to have some influence and contribution. And so it feels more satisfying. You're not just in a large corporation where it feels like there's more anonymousness to people, because I think connecting with people is kind of nice. And so in my career, I guess, I started to work for smaller companies, and the last company that I was with was a startup, and I managed to have a small exit, which then allowed me to take a break to discover, hey, what am I going to do? Really, really do. And at that point, I actually remembered, talking to my husband, and he says, well, why don't you do your own thing? And I was like, sure, why don't I do that? And I remember getting the company name at the time, which was Tina Frey Designs. And we've since shortened it to TF Design. But at the time I got the company name, I didn't even know what I was going to do yet. But I just knew I needed to pursue something different. So I took the time off, and it wasn't really that long. I'd say it was quite a few months. And I remember I did some traveling, but I also remember looking on my bookshelf and thinking, how is it that I have all these books on resin, which happens to be the material that I specialize working in. So
some books on what? On
resin. It's this material called resin.
Okay. Yes.
So my collection is mainly sculpted and then molded and cast pieces in resin. And the material is kind of unusual in the sense that it can look like glass, it can look like ceramic, it can look like stone. And so there's something about this materiality of this medium that I chose to specialize in that was interesting to me. And it was funny that on my bookshelf, there was this book that sort of called out to me, or there were several books actually. And it was like over the years when I was doing my creative things, I buy books and look into materials or things that I really was interested in. And it was like, that's really funny that that was something that led to me to realize, hey, there's a material that you can work in. There's also a breadth of ideas that I knew I wanted to create. And the material was something that I knew I could use to work with to translate those ideas into something that was physically tangible. And I also felt that there was a breadth of endless ideas associated with being able to focus on this direction of using this material. And that's how the idea of my company started. So I remember when I first started the company, I sculpted some items, and it's almost like I could visualize at the time what I wanted to create. And when I sculpted that piece, and then it was eventually cast in the resin material, it was translucent and it was beautiful, and it looked exactly like what I envisioned the item to be. And to see that item come from an idea in your mind to fruition to something you're holding in your hand, I remember it was just the most profoundly beautiful feeling. And I cried. Like, it was just this fulfilling sense of being able to make something that you imagined and then now you're holding in your hand was pretty profound experience. And so that's, I guess, how creativity for me became this, okay, it's so rewarding, let's keep doing it.
It's amazing, like the way you just described it, because it's a true creation in materiality, but it reflects creation in life, in anything. And if we don't have a vision, then we can't create our vision. And the way you describe it, like, would apply to anything that we might want, any circumstances that we would like to create for ourselves in our lives. So that's it's actually beautiful. Except it's like, it's happening in the flesh, in the material. That's that must be super satisfying.
It is super satisfying. And so and now that I look back to 16 years ago, I see how, as I've learned more about the spiritual side of things, how I think you just are aware of things, but you don't know, you don't call it that, you don't pay attention to it. But the things that you imagine, or as they now say, call it manifestations, they actually are realities, in the sense that that item that I imagined, this thought in my mind that now came into this three-dimensional object, was the same as how I remember thinking, okay, I want to start a company. What do you envision that company to be? Where do you see yourself? How do you feel when you're there? What is it like when I'm at an exhibition? Where do I see the products being placed? What stores are carrying it? Where is this? And so I remember very early on in my company, when I started it, having these dreams. Essentially, you call it dreams, and we all dream of something. And I think it's good to keep those things, call them your dreams. But if you dream of something, that dream of whatever it is something that, and I think instinctively bubbles up to the surface of impacting your actions and things that fall into place. And so when they talk about manifestation in that sense. I think it's just instinctively, we all know how to dream. We all know how to manifest those things into reality. And people should just keep dreaming, because those dreams lead to a reality. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. But because my sense is that when we, like, we dream and we want to manifest, and maybe we know that it's possible, but it's until we have an experience of it where we really realize that this is exactly what I had envisioned, and now it's here, so I've created it.
Yes.
It's sort of still is in the intangible, and sometimes hard to believe that we are actually are capable, or we are that powerful.
Yes.
So now I'm like listening to you, I'm like just maybe having an experience of creating something with our own hands, like something creative, can be really an embodiment of our creative capabilities that apply beyond just, possibly art.
Yes, 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 absolutely. It's not just the object. It's like envisioning yourself doing anything. Just essentially anything is possible. And at the time when I was doing this, I didn't even know that's what you call it. Of course, now that I read about it, I'm like, oh, wow, I guess that just was happening. And I think a lot of people, when they accomplish whatever it is in life, they have an idea of where they want to be in the future. You don't necessarily know the specific steps of how to get there, but I think that's where you just follow it and the right path. When they call it synchronicities, those things come to you, those doors open, and you just step through them. Sometimes if you step through one that doesn't feel right or doesn't work, you change paths, and then you will step through the right door to lead you to where your big picture is. Where do you want it to be? And I think you have to really trust that that is the case. It doesn't happen overnight. Some things can happen faster than others, but in general, I think you have to believe, you have to dream, and just follow that path and see where it goes. So,
and see it the same way that you're seeing the object once you're like crafting it before it actually gets molded and created for real.
Exactly. And so there's going to be some short-term goals, like you envision making an object, because every season I have to make new designs. And so oftentimes I have to manifest or think about what those things are, and I can visualize it before they're sculpted. And then I have to actually sculpt it or make that object, and then it comes to fruition. But there are also the bigger picture, longer term, like where do you see yourself in growing a company, for example? How do you envision the space you're going to be in? What's your showroom going to be like? Who do you have working for you? And so on and so on. So all of those things, there's going to be the longer term, bigger picture ones, and then the ones that are obviously more immediate, that you have to manifest or dream about.
Oh, and are there also, because I'm like seeing the parallel with how we manifest as well, like maybe some that we think that's what we want, and we try, and then it doesn't quite work out the right way, and then maybe these ones don't make it if we're comparing to your craft, and maybe but this one is not quite, and maybe not gonna make it to the shelves and to the
there's definitely there's definitely experiments along the way when I do make things. Like I was creating some other new designs for another purpose recently, and I had all of these thoughts about wanting to make it. And so I finished the prototypes, but they don't resonate for me. And so they're kind of like, okay, put aside for now, and then we move on to other things. So the trial and error is also okay, to understand that sometimes you will experiment with things that if that object doesn't feel right, you move on to do something else. And it's a constant sort of process, and to accept that path is not always easy. There's going to be little bends in the way, but generally speaking, if you just go with that flow, you will find the right path. And it's to recognize that that is how you feel.
So I let you say, like, it's recognize how you feel. Do you have some advice? How does it work for you? Like, what's your intuitive process, or how do you know that something is aligned for you or is not? How do you recognize it for yourself?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes it was in the beginning, it was sometimes when you have a certain decision you're going to make, or something opens up that you see a possibility, it's almost like a whole bunch of other things that you know are related fall into place like dominoes. And when that happens, it's like, oh, that's got to be the right path. And it was like that when I decided to specialize working with this material for my company at Resin, as I'd mentioned. It was almost like a whole bunch of things checked the boxes of, I knew it had the versatility. I knew I could come up with lots of ideas. I knew there was a lot of, for me, mental boxes that I had requirements for that checked through. And so there's this, like they say, synchronicities, a lot of things kind of fall into place. Sometimes that will happen very easily. Sometimes it's not that obvious. Sometimes you just need to try things and then you sit with it and see if it feels right. So because I've been getting into meditation so much the last 6 years, I'm becoming more paying attention to how that feels when something feels right. It's also sometimes the struggle of trying to do something. If you're trying to do something and you're getting roadblocks or it's not working, it's something that you've got to pay attention to. However, there is also an interesting thing to be aware of, all because sometimes something is hard or is difficult or you're afraid. That doesn't mean necessarily you don't pursue it either. So
interesting, you're putting your finger on this one. I was going to ask, how do you know the difference when it's the difficulty means this is a no, or the difficulty means, oh, it's actually the right track because it's out of your comfort zone?
Exactly. Okay. So obviously, when you're starting a company, there's lots of ups and downs. Sometimes you're like, throwing up your hands going, maybe I should just call it quits. And when I talk to other young designers as they're starting their company, sometimes you will encounter points where you're like, what the hell am I doing? Why am I doing this? It's just insane. So I do remember several points when I was starting my company, especially in the beginning when I was working initially by myself before I could hire folks to work with me. In the beginning, there were times when I remember it was so physically, mentally draining that you're at your end of just exhaustion because you've worked so hard that you're like, what am I doing? However, there was always still this, I don't know, vision of the future of what I wanted to achieve. I guess that kind of kept me going. And in that sense, I do remember very clearly, like, I've never worked so hard in my life, harder than when I was in finance. There was different struggles in finance. They were also very hard at times, but it was a different physical hard because you're sometimes packing your orders and you're in the beginning when you start your company, you're packing orders, lifting boxes. And I mean, it's physically setting up for shows or whatever that might be. You're physically maxed out and drained and exhausted, but somehow there's a different drive that energizes you because you have this vision of something beyond that present moment of struggle that keeps you going. So it's not to say that doing something that's enjoyable, you're not going to have those roadblocks or challenges. That's actually normal and okay, because if we never persevere through those hardships, we also never get to the other side of what that is. And so it's a sense of like, you can't just go, oh, this is hard. It's not supposed to be hard. You throw up your hands and you call it quits. It's not that. It's you have to really look deeper in what is the ultimate end goal you're trying to get to. Is that end goal, the bigger picture, longer term thing, something that still resonates for you? And if that is, then that moment in that present where you're struggling and just going, I'm dying, is just, it's, there's a light at the end of that tunnel because it's short term. Okay. And so that's, I think, how you differentiate, or knowing that doesn't mean you turn away from adversity just like that, it's also recognizing, is that something you can, persevere, get over, and move on to the next thing. I think that's where maybe the difference might be,
The
to
vision,
know,
the
yeah,
strong
the vision,
yeah,
the stronger vision of knowing what the bigger picture is, so that that immediate thing is something just temporary, essentially.
Because you shared with me as well that at some, that as some say,
Yes.
oh, at some stage, you nearly went into burnout, and that's how you found
Yes. Yes.
meditation. So can you tell
Yes.
us a bit about how was it, the difference of how you operate before meditation and after meditation, and maybe a bit about your experience of burnout and how you overcame it, or if you had to, if you weren't ever in the situation, now that you're into meditation like that, you would, but for someone who might be in a situation of pre-burnout or burnout, if you have any advice for people, that would be awesome as well.
Yeah, so it's a really good question about how you get to a point of knowing when it is burnout.
Yeah.
So for me, that happened 6 years ago. So I was 10 years into the company, and so the company was growing, everything was great. I was growing out of my space and moving studios to a bigger space and having employees. And 6 years ago, I got to a stage where we were outgrowing. So I ended up buying a building that needed 9 months of renovation to get to where it is now. But during that period, when I did the switch with moving the space, the renovation, everything seemed to just kind of fall on my shoulders, all it seemed like at the same time. So renovation, chasing contractors, getting things done, keeping employees happy, feeling like I completely destroyed my company, because keep in mind the physical space we were working in, we'd moved and we still had more renovations to do, but the physical space that we were working in was just in mass chaos. And so this went on for 9 months that I was just like, what am I doing? Like I physically had maxed out. However, I think even leading up to that, I realized what happens is, so there's the vision and it's great, but we're still always learning individuals. We're always improving or figuring ourselves out. We're always growing. I realize now when I look back, I had a lot of growth to do, because at that point in my life, I still had a lot of the preconceived notions of perfection, things that I thought things had to be done a certain way, and that perfectionism, what you expect of yourself, your employees, all of that stuff is still your baggage that you grow up with from society. So we operate with a lot of those expectations on ourselves that we put up with and realize, and you think this is how it's supposed to be. So you with those pressures, eventually, even though you're pursuing something that's wonderful in your dream, there are things that limit you. They are not the best.
They're huge energy drains.
Yes, exactly. And they inhibit essentially what you could possibly be, but you don't realize it because, you're so excited building your company. It's all great. So there's like balances. So this excitement of building the company and then the workload kind of getting to a point you're like, oh my gosh. And then sometimes you have the high and then it pushes back to the high. So you survive for a while, but then eventually sometimes you kind of get out of balance. So at this point, it was like, oh my God, what have I done? So it's not that this has gone away. Mm-hmm.
You know what, as you were talking, I got this mental image of a snake shedding, the way, like, when they start to grow and then suddenly they must feel so tight, and it must be so uncomfortable to crack the old skin and feel free on the other side.
Exactly. That's very, very accurate. And so if you don't experience this knowing of this hardship side, you never really know how to remove this shell of the skin, as you say. And so what happened was, at that 6 years ago point, I was like, I can't keep operating in this way of perfectionist, whatever it is that I knew that was limiting me to really appreciate what this higher side was. And so at that point, I hit this burnout. It was actually really serious, really bad. And I was just like ready to just, stop everything and just, I mean, it was awful, just bad, very, very bad, just mentally, physically. I was at my all-time dark night of the soul. So it was at the stage where I was willing to try psychedelics, and that was 6 years ago. And I had my first, and keep in mind, growing up, I never really did anything like this. But I, tried acid for the first time, and then subsequently found a mushroom therapist who basically sat me, and I was able to break this cycle of what my belief systems were and start to think differently about how do I approach life from a different perspective? How do I really focus more on these bigger picture, lovely goals and things that really make you tick and resonate? And so I think the mushroom therapy or psychedelics really helped sort of break through those,
some stuff, some layers.
Yeah, some layers. And then the meditation as a result, because once you see, you're able to get back there without the help of psychedelics. For me, that was really helpful for the breakthrough. And so
and sorry, Tina, just to be clear, you didn't just go to a rave party and take some stuff. That's not what happened, huh?
No. And that's what's really funny, because growing up, I didn't do any drugs. I didn't even do marijuana. Like, I was kind of a nerd. And I don't really enjoy marijuana. Having tried it, it's not my thing. So I am not like your typical person. So I wasn't into drugs at all. And so it was always in a therapeutic setting with intention, sitting with a therapist, or subsequently sitting without a therapist, but always with intention. And it was always something that unfolded and opened up into some knowledge that built on some knowledge you learned the last time, and so on and so on. And it just keeps opening in terms of unpeeling the layers of what you need to learn. And I feel like there's intelligence to the universe that's available for all of us as a result, that really just unfolds. And so the meditation really helps you access that again without having to be on a psychedelic. And the practice of it, and this muscle of doing it every day, essentially allows you to reconnect and understand who you are, connect to spirituality, and
So in that context, would you say that the psychedelics as a either like a key holder or like an accelerator? Gives
accelerator
momentum, gives
accelerator
momentum on the spiritual journey, and then it's easier and it's faster than once we through meditation to have like faster results.
Yes, I do. And I do think meditation is definitely the key way to get there. I think I might have even started meditating very early on, right around this burnout phase. And I can't quite remember if maybe the psychedelics was kind of at around precisely the same time. And, some people can get there without it, but I do feel like I was lucky that that was presented to me as an option. And I'm glad I took that step to experience really, stepping outside of those routine, as they say, the default mode network, to step out of the routine to see what I could see. And at that low point, when I was at my dark night of the soul, like I guess it was my first, I should describe one moment during the first psychedelic journey, what had happened, because I was so stressed, so uptight. Just remember growing your company at the time, I was just in stress mode, right? You can't continue to function that way. But I had my iWatch on, and the iWatch had the Breathe app. And during the psychedelic journey, the Breathe app came on, and I remember, okay, I'm going to breathe. And I breathed, inhaled and exhaled. For the first time, I felt like the hugest release of stress, that it was the most profound feeling of, okay, I'd forgotten how to breathe, truly breathe, and just this release of this stress. And it was tears and tears associated with all of this, you're hanging on to so much. Not negative energy, but stress. It's just anxiety, stress of to control everything when you're trying to be a perfectionist, and things you need to let go of. And so slowly that letting go of a lot of things and those beliefs, etc., those, whatever it is, the fears, essentially we're fearful of a lot of things, which is why we hang on to a lot of whatever those things are that prevent us from experiencing fear, right?
Yeah.
And when you let go of it, it's very liberating.
It's called fight or flight or freeze.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Stagnation, holding on
Yes,
to.
exactly. And we
Makes a
can't
lot of
sustain,
sense.
yeah, we can't sustain that way of being. So that was a big opening for me. I mean, just from a practicality standpoint, I was always checking my emails, always connected. There was never really an off mode, even on vacation, because you're always still responsible. But knowing that you can actually stop now and things are going to be fine, like it's hard to kind of know you can really disconnect and it's okay. And that freedom of disconnecting is very liberating. And I think it allows you then to really use that space to connect to, okay, what else is next? What do I do? Like, what else is going to unfold? So I think it was super beneficial, because having those moments of really hard times, low points, whatever you call it, is an opportunity to transition into something else bigger and better than what we thought we were capable of.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so how has it been since? What's the difference in your experience of your own company, of your own creative process, now that you've stepped into this more expansive state of being?
Mm-hmm. The more it's so the company is chugging along. It's fine. It's very stable. We've got great team of employees, and just the joy of the gratitude essentially of working with a good team of people is also really wonderful. So it's like a different perspective of everything. And then just creating from the place of love and joy and putting that item out there. I mean, it always was putting out an item of joy, but to really connect to it and really feel like what you are creating is something that is a way of my way of sharing love with the universe, is, I guess, a way of sharing this bigger meaning to what one does.
Yeah.
But in terms of the meditation itself, so every day I do meditate at least an hour. If I could do 2 hours, it's even nicer.
Okay.
But it's like a beautiful, blissful feeling. But it's sometimes even helps to I don't know, sort out roadblocks, things that happen in your mind, and to really parse apart kind of issues and see what is the bigger picture in everything. But sometimes if you're not, you're not thinking, you're basically stepping aside to let whatever it is come through as a message. And so sometimes those messages solve these sort of problems or questions that you have come up. And I am feeling like right now I'm at a stage where, okay, so I've done the creativity thing, I've got the employees and everybody's happy, and I'm feeling like there's a path that's fine, and it's great. But as I get into this meditation, I almost feel like there's a bigger, even yet another soul purpose. There's a career purpose, but what is that soul purpose that's calling for me to do something more, or what's next?
Yeah.
So in a way, that is what I'm sitting with. What is the next? What is the other way to be in the world? Which is bigger than us, bigger than ourselves. It's like, how do you be?
Is this about having, like, this impact on, like, I know you shared with me that you're also somehow guiding or maybe acting a little bit like a mentor for people. Is that part of possibly this next step for you, like this purpose?
Yeah, I feel instinctively it is, because when you're in this state of bliss, the best way to describe it is I feel abundant. I feel happy and healthy and joyful, gratitude. And so it's the next inevitable feeling is, how do I share this with people? I want other people to have the same beautiful feeling. And so whenever it's possible, I guess I love to just share that with people, whether it's fellow designers, friends, people who are stuck, your family, whoever it is how do I share this way of being, whether it's sharing how to meditate, talking about, helping figure out what brings them joy, essentially. Any little way how you be in the world is a way to share that. Just to share that with people.
Yeah, I love that. So then it's okay to share your contact with the audience if some people feel drawn to maybe get in touch with you for advice, if they're maybe a creative who might be thinking of taking a crazy step, or maybe someone who's hesitating, or so like they'll know how to find you, maybe if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tina. And so I know we are nearly at time, but I always like to ask at the end, is there a question that I have not asked you that you would love to respond or to address, or any parting words that you want to share before we part ways?
Yeah, I think is to always be not be afraid to take that step, whatever that is, even if it's something that's fearful, because you never really know what's going to unfold ahead of you. It can be a beautiful journey.
So taking the step, one step at a time. But okay. Beautiful. Well, Tina, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. I find it so inspiring that we don't have to stay in soul-sucking professions, and the vision. What I'm getting out of our conversation is dreaming and trusting that the vision can become manifest, and letting the vision guide us along the way. And maybe maybe take some mushrooms along the way to help out with to speed up the trusting process. Well, I'm saying that jokingly, but I know it's a serious topic, and amazing. I'm very grateful that you are opened up and told us about that. Maybe it would deserve another conversation to get into this aspect, which feels like a wide topic as well in spirituality. So thank you so much, Tina.
With pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So thank you so much, everyone. And I shall see you next week for another conversation. Bye. Love you all.
Bye.
Bye, Tina.
Bye.